Our senior White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, has more for us. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Robin. Well, as Putin ramps up his brutal bombing of Ukrainian cities, President Biden overnight saying he thinks that the Russian president is a, quote, rational actor, but saying he is one who greatly miscalculated Russia's military strength and the fight of the Ukrainian people. But despite Russia's desperation now, Biden says he does not think Putin will ultimately use a nuclear weapon. As Russia escalates its offensive and Putin continues to threaten a nuclear attack, President Biden overnight warning of the risks of this moment.
The miscalculation could occur. No one can be sure what would happen, and it could end in Armageddon.
Putin has said he isn't bluffing about the potential use of nuclear weapons, but Biden disagrees, saying despite Russia's setbacks on the battlefield in Ukraine, he doesn't think Putin will actually go that far.
I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible of him to talk about it. I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly.
In a CNN interview, the president asked if he had instructed the Pentagon to game out a nuclear
scenario.
Biden,
don't do it. No, he said, oh no, oh no.
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly.
Oh no, dude, I fell into that trap. Mr. Biden, Mr. Brandon, please get down, sir. Mr. President, you've fallen into the rookie hole. You said Putin is a rational actor. I've done that mistake. Will not repeat it again. I'll tell you what. Classic rookie hole mistake from Brandon, okay? He's in the rookie hole, dude. He said Putin is a rational actor.
In a CNN interview, the president asked if he had instructed the Pentagon to game out a nuclear scenario just in case.
The Pentagon didn't have to be asked.
The war in
If he's wrong, as they're being vaporized, the last moments of civilization will be ripping Biden a new one over how wrong he was. Yeah, they'll be like, you got owned, sir. Meanwhile, he's up on fucking Air Force One, okay? He's towering over the nuclear mushroom clouds as he reads Twitter, as he reads, people on Twitter being like, you got owned, sir. Remember when you said nukes weren't vaporized? As I'm vaporized, I'm tweeting, I'm sending hit tweets. One last time, dude. One last dance.
Recent days escalating to new heights. Russia bombarding civilian targets and critical infrastructure across Ukraine for 3 straight days. Firing more than 100 missiles and dozens of drones, killing at least 19 people, some of the strikes captured in these videos circulating online. The United Nations condemning the attacks as particularly shocking. Biden Tuesday joining the G7.
Is it particularly shocking? I feel like it's not particularly shocking. As a matter of fact, it's unsurprising how brutal the Russian occupation and invasion has been. One, it's war, right? But 2, it's not like they've been less unhinged in the past. You know what I mean? I would say it's the least shocking. Like, especially when it very much seems like Putin is like, I'm not gonna be, operating in good faith here. Obviously, if I feel like I'm getting owned super hard, I'm gonna throw out, in the words of Donald Trump, the N-bomb. Okay. And by that, I mean nuclear. And also, if you strike targets that are outside of the eastern regions, especially if you're like striking out, especially if you're striking like the Crimean Bridge, for example, bridge of strategic and symbolic importance. He's like, yeah, I'm going to do the same back to you, but worse. Because he's already doing the worst shit. Anyway, let's continue.
Leaders for an emergency meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. The allied leaders are pledging to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, but Zelensky's urging them to do more.
Щит для України.
Calling for more sanctions and air defense systems. The U.S. Tuesday sending 4 more longer-range missile systems, along with more advanced air defense systems from Germany. The big question now is, how does Putin get out of this? What is his off-ramp, as the president has said? Biden
is the #1 strategic target for Ukraine and a 100% a viable option to hit, saying it's civilian is complete bullshit. The retaliation for a bridge that provides logistical support for the war in a limited capacity, but more importantly is also a civilian bridge, is Putin saying, well, we're striking the power grid. You know what I mean? Which is bullshit. Like, what Putin is doing is complete bullshit. It's more brutal than what Ukraine did. And they're always going to do that. Like, they're always going to reply in an infinitely worse way. Specifically because like he already invaded Ukraine. That's it. That's like, You know what I mean? That already is like the worst thing you can do. The U.S. always replies in a more brutal way too. It's our playbook. Yeah. And so that's where we're at now. They are the invading force. All of their actions are going to be violent. Exactly. Is there a revanchist war from the start saying that it's an eye for an eye is the same take as Musk? I'm not even saying it's an eye for an eye. I'm describing what Vladimir Putin's take is on it, because it's not an eye for an eye. It's an eye for like taking your whole fucking skull off. Okay. Like, his justification for targeting infrastructure is a silly one. Everyone understands what the purpose of Putin's Ukrainian attacks are. Like, you're not hitting Lviv for a specific logistical purpose. You're doing it to terrorize the Ukrainian people that felt like there was already a return to normalcy, right? Well, not a complete return to normalcy, but like life had started. People in Ukraine and Western territories that are no longer occupied were already like living their lives again. And as a matter of fact, would, from as far as I understand, didn't even go to bomb shelters whenever air raid sirens were happening, because that's how commonplace it had become. This was surprising in the sense that like these were actual bombs that flew over and ended up killing civilians. And for that reason, now they're back to being afraid. And that is the purpose. It's a disruption of the day-to-day experience of Ukrainian lives. And it's also to strike fear in their hearts, and to make the war as costly as possible. It is terrorism.
Last night said Putin could end this war right now. He could argue to the Russian people that he set out what he intended to and bring Russian soldiers home. But Robin, based on what we are seeing on the ground right now, it is clear Putin's strategy for now is to double down and escalate.
It does seem to be the case. And Mary, President Biden also said that he has no plans to meet with Putin during the upcoming summit, unless it's about the release of Brittany Griner?
Robin, the president said right now he has no intention of meeting with Vladimir Putin at the summit next month. Biden making it very clear that there will be no one-on-one negotiation about Ukraine, saying the allied leaders have agreed there'll be no discussion of Ukraine without Ukraine present. But Biden said if Putin wants to discuss other issues like the release of WNBA star Brittany Griner, well, Biden says he's willing to meet with him.
All right.
Robin.
Okay, Mary, thanks so much.
Hi, everyone.
No one gave a single shit about that attack. We grew too accustomed to this for their terror to work. I mean, it's still terrorism, though. You know what I mean? You can say you grew accustomed to it, which is really up that you have to endure that trauma, right, in your everyday existence. But it still disrupts people's lives, right? Especially when the targets were the electrical grid and the power grid in general. So for that reason, you know, there's still areas that have had no power for the past 3 days. Didn't we bomb pretty indiscriminately during Operation Shock and Awe? Yes, it was really fucked up. It was really brutal, which is precisely why I always say, like, what Vladimir Putin is doing, American playbook shit. And when I say that, I mean that as a negative. For those of you who don't understand, I consider that to be awful, the worst thing you can do. What summit is the next month they're talking about? I'm not entirely certain. I mean, it's bad, but we definitely don't achieve whatever they want with those attacks, especially from that Ukraine has more air defense. Okay, guys, stop mentioning every time one person raids, please. It's going to be annoying. G20 summit. Ukraine also bombed in Russian Belgorod today, it seems. Am I wrong for thinking Ukraine killing civilians isn't good either? Of course you're not wrong for that. If you are anti-war, you're anti-war across the board. Like, I have my, like, people...
Thank you so much for
people in this community and people across the board are claiming that the Crimean Bridge bombing, which was a suicide attack, right? Like, which was a suicide bombing, is completely valid. It's a completely valid target. It's Russian occupied territory. Like, they should be able to do that. But I don't consider that to be an appropriate target either. And I understand why that is not considered an appropriate target. If that's an appropriate target, why aren't they bombing railroads and like why aren't they bombing, why aren't they doing what Russia is doing to Ukraine and like trying to use long-range missile systems or any kind of bombing with deep inside of Russian territory? It is a bridge, I know. Russian escalation is going to happen regardless. And this is not both siding. This is not a both sides situation. One side is overwhelmingly bad. That side is Russia. There is no both sides in the situation. Russia has been bad, has been the bad actor in this circumstance from the jump. The moment that they invaded, from the moment that they invaded all the way to now. And even when they are trying to do the eye for an eye as a propaganda point, internally, even when they're trying to claim that it's an eye for an eye, their tactics are completely escalating it even further because they're the original instigators in this circumstance. They originally escalated by invading. So there is no both sides in that circumstance. Let's take a look at the CNN exclusive, the Jake Tapper one-on-one, where Biden addresses Putin's nuclear threats in Ukraine.
For doing this, sir. Appreciate it.
Happy to.
So for people at home who don't know, this is the map room. During World War II, this is where it was basically the situation room for FDR. He would look at sensitive information. And now we're at a period where there's high stakes war in Europe. You recently said that this is the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis that there's a legitimate possibility of someone using a nuclear weapon, which could lead to Armageddon. That's the word you used. How realistic is it, do you think, that Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible for him to talk about it. The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations.
What is the red line for the United States and NATO, and have you directed the Pentagon and other agencies to game out what a response would be if he did use a tactical nuclear weapon, or if he bombed the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine, or anything along those lines?
There's been discussions on that, but I'm not going to get into that. It would be irresponsible of me to talk about what we would or wouldn't do.
Have you asked the Pentagon to game it out, though? I mean, just in case?
The Pentagon didn't have to be asked.
So French President Macron told me that he doesn't think that Putin is acting rational. And he said that he thinks a lot of this is because of how isolated Putin was for 2 years during the pandemic. And others who have dealt with him, Condi Rice and Bob Gates and James Clapper, have used words like erratic and unhinged to describe Putin's behavior today. Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly. I think he thought, you may recall, I pointed out that they were going to invade, that all those 100,000 or more troops there, and no one believed that he was going to invade Ukraine. You listen to what he says. If you listen to the speech he made after, when that decision was being made, he talked about the whole idea of he was needed to be the leader of Russia that united all the Russian speakers. I mean, it just, I just think it's irrational.
So if he's not rational and...
No, I didn't say he's not rational.
You said the speech wasn't right.
I think the speech is,
okay.
His objectives were not right. I think he thought, Jake, he thought he was going to be welcomed with open arms. That this has been the home of Mother Russia in Kyiv, and he was going to be welcomed. And I think he just totally miscalculated.
So you talked about this.
God damn. He said, I think he thought, little bro thought he was America. You are not him, dude. Brandon saying, you are not him. We will be greeted as liberators is what he thought was going to happen. Except, when America runs that fucking line, okay, and does what it wants to do, wherever the wants to do it all around the world, is still America, okay? Not only are they a nuclear superpower, but they're also a dominating hegemonic force on the entire planet. So it doesn't matter if they're not welcomed as liberators or not. It is wild, though. I don't necessarily disagree with what Biden is saying. I mean, I don't think that Putin legitimately thought he was going to be welcomed as a liberator. I think it's the same as America. He just thought he didn't give a shit. The part that he actually overextended on was the might of his conventional military forces. I think that and how much support Ukraine had gotten from NATO, and how much more powerful its standing army was with respect to what it looked like in 2014. I think that's what it is. I think that he literally thought he could roll over. I think he thought that he could take down important infrastructure and also their air defenses in a matter of 2 to 3 days. And he thought he could roll it. He could roll up his forces all the way into Kyiv immediately. Then he got his shit pushed in, had to consolidate the forces back into the Eastern Front and engage in trench warfare on the Eastern Front, go back to a war that they are used to fighting. And their forces were hard to resupply. Their supply lines were already disrupted from the jump. It was a very difficult task. So difficult that even dumbass American himbo Twitch streamers mentioned that overtaking the entirety of Ukraine will be impossible. Occupying it will be impossible over an extended period of time. and it will be a civilization-ending conflict, which is why another dumbass Twitch himbo who also agrees with Biden in this circumstance thought Putin is bad, but he's not mad. Famously, that's what he said, whoever that guy was. But turns out, he is both bad and mad. A mad lad. He was mad because bad. Oh, verdict watch, Alex Jones defamation trial. Yeah, we'll cover this when it actually comes to fruition, when it ends. I think there's a good slab of ego in what he did as well. Likely wants to be remembered as a guy that made Russia bigger. I think like when he was... Also get why he wanted to strike Ukraine, though. NATO knocking on his door, the bear bagged in no corner. That part is fine. But ultimately, it's not like you can make a risk assessment, okay? You can make a risk assessment and then not act out in the worst way possible. Because if your goal is to undermine the influence of NATO, you did the absolute worst thing possible. Now you got Finland and Sweden. You know what I mean? Now you got everybody thinking, well, you don't even have a good enough conventional military force, so neutrality, the unspoken neutrality agreements that we had. We're just going to fucking join NATO. We're going to justify NATO's existence. Like, if your goal is to literally say, I want to undermine the influence of NATO at my doorstep inside of Ukraine, then invading Ukraine is the absolute worst, dumbest thing you could have done. Continuing to embolden, or rather continuing to strengthen your trade relationships with Europe would have been the adequate thing to do. It was such a appropriate thing to do that America hated it. America hated the Nord Stream pipeline. Nord Stream 2 was something that America certainly did not want completed. And your European allies at that point were your trade partners, and they still wanted it. They wanted cheap energy. And you up. Like, I already have a moral opposition to this kind of bloodshed, okay, across the board. I'm anti-war. I recognize that every side loses in conflicts like this, especially the working class loses in conflicts like this, where they're either being forcibly drafted to go fight a war that nobody wants to fight in, or they're being invaded and getting bombed non-fucking stop, or even losing energy for 3 fucking days. It was just a major up across the board. Denazification was an idiotic propaganda point to justify your actions. And I say this as someone who has always, even way, way before the invasion of Ukraine, have talked about the Azov Battalion and America funding and training the Azov Battalion and Nazis and whatnot. It still does not justify full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, a position that I've held on to from the jump. Like, no part of Putin's stated goals were achieved with his actions. So it was fucking idiotic. If you don't want to galvanize and embolden Nazis, don't invade the country. Because the one group of people that will be legitimized in their existence will be the most outwardly violent reactionary fascists. They will be the genuine emancipators. Their cause will be seen as just. All you will do is make more reactionary people. This is something that America has done over the course of the past 2 decades with its war on terror. I know this as an American citizen who has been covering the war on terror and the war in the Middle East for many, many years. So if your goal is denazification, congratulations, you emboldened and galvanized and strengthened Nazis, okay? Because just like what happened with the Taliban, for as many members of the Taliban as you kill, you're killing a bunch of cousins, you're killing a bunch of family members, you're creating new members of the Taliban. And the same goes for Azov and other like-minded reactionary forces that are now going to be institutionalized permanently within Ukrainian politics. You're going to strengthen NATO's influence, because now everyone's like, okay, well, NATO does have a point. Also, if you care about denazification, I mean, there's like literally nationalist, hyper-nationalist, ultra-nationalist forces that Putin is using as well. So there's that too. Kind of interesting. Although an insurgency type situation didn't end up playing out, I do wonder if some Zelensky hardline stuff is because he's terrified of losing ground to the Ukrainian far right. We just don't have a clear picture of what's playing out in Ukraine. Russia is even worse, though. Yeah, but also on top of that, I think that Zelensky is more beholden to, whatever the Western partners want out of Ukraine, more than his like domestic politics and his fears of right-wing forces within the country overtaking him eventually. So there's that too. But let's get back to Brandon and what he has to say.
A few days ago, the search for an off-ramp for him, because his back is against the wall. There are questions about how rational he is. He already was a brutal dictator. What is the off-ramp? Is there any acceptable way that he can, in his mind, without seizing territory in a way that would not be acceptable to Ukraine?
I don't know what's in his mind, but clearly he could leave. He could just flat leave and still probably hold his position together in Russia. The idea that he's been able to convince a significant the Russian people that this is something that thought made sense, but now he's accomplished what he wanted to do, and it's time to bring Russians home.
Would you be willing to meet with him at the G20?
Look, I have no intention of meeting with him, but for example, if he came to me at the G20 and said, I want to talk about the release of Griner, I'd meet with him. I mean, it would depend, but I can't imagine. We've taken a position. I just did a G7 meeting this morning. The idea, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So I'm not about to, nor is anyone else prepared to negotiate with Russia about them staying in Ukraine, keeping any part of Ukraine, et cetera. So it would depend on specifically what he wanted to talk about. But look, he's acted brutally. I think he's committed war crime. So I don't.
And let me tell you, Jack, I know all about war crimes, so I'm the best guy to call it out.
I don't see any rationale to meet with.
When people hear the word Armageddon,
The notion that like we don't negotiate with terrorists when you're talking about a state actor on top of it, which by the way is a silly one, especially when you are the United States of America, obviously. But let's not even get into that. But ultimately, like talking to a state actor about the release or a prisoner swap for Brittany Griner, he's open to that, but he's not open to like giving Russia an off ramp in this, or even like trying to forward an olive branch as a mediator and just expecting Russia to continue bombing the living shit out of Ukraine and civilian territories within Ukraine, or even potentially waiting for further escalations, whether it be chemical weapons or whether it be fucking nuclear weapons, God forbid, is a little terrifying as far as prospects goes. Now, he will mask that, he will shroud that by saying, well, we're not going to have a conversation with Putin without Ukraine at the table, which is of course understandable. But the reality in this circumstance is that Ukraine's needs and Ukraine's wants, while legitimate, are still completely beholden to what America is willing to give, okay? Because obviously without NATO involvement, Ukraine would have looked a lot like Ukraine in 2014. It would have looked a lot like that. A standing military that is completely, wholly incapable of defending themselves against Russia's conventional forces even.
they get scared from used by a U.S. president. They get scared. Do you think in any way discussing this type of thing publicly, openly, Putin's possible use of nuclear weapons, might have the opposite effect of what you want? Some of our wobblier European allies be even more scared of confronting Putin?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, look,
When you say it's not 2014 anymore and Ukraine is different now, yeah, it's not 2014 anymore because of NATO involvement, though. You recognize that, right? That's backed by America. America is offering both small arms and also missile systems to Ukraine currently. And without that kind of support, Ukraine would not be able to defend itself from Russia in any meaningful capacity. I fear that what must be done in every single part of this was trying to avoid further escalation, America itself is also considered further escalation to be to go too far at certain points, which is why they released that New York Times article openly condemning Ukrainian special forces, claiming that Ukrainian special forces were responsible for the terror attack against Dugin that ended up killing Dugin's daughter. There's no reason for them to come out and just fucking come out and say that's wrong. That's that you guys did that. I know we will do it. We will do the Alex Jones verdict, but I'm talking about something different right now. Can we get to that in a second? I think it's a very concise video talking about what's happening in Ukraine. Talks about nukes, weapons, donations, NATO, and the Nord Stream pipeline. You could juice the fuck out of this. No, I'm not gonna cover this random video that you want me to cover about this channel. My take is just 25 minutes. I'm not gonna do that right now, man. I don't know what happened. Did someone in my Discord watch this and they want me to fucking gas this up or something? Stop. You guys keep a lot of long-term community members are just pumping this video for some reason. It's so weird. Wait, what? When chatter suggests videos, because I'm in the middle of commentary on something that's different.
Directed, when I'm talking about, I'm talking to Putin. He, in fact, cannot continue with impunity to talk about the use of a tactical nuclear weapon as if that's a rational thing to do. The mistakes get made. And the miscalculation could occur. No one can be sure what would happen, and it could end in Armageddon.
Hasan, you really hate your viewers, don't you, lol? Yeah, famously, I'm a hater of my viewers. Obviously, that's the reason why I overstream by many, many hours every day. It's typical of me to do that. I don't think anybody believes that, but all right.
Are afraid of that, though, that it could.
Well, no, I don't think any rational person saying the initial use of of a nuclear weapon, killing thousands of people, does not have the prospect of leading to something that can be way out of control.
Let's turn to Saudi Arabia. Some of your Democratic allies on Capitol Hill are afraid that the U.S. got played when you went to Saudi Arabia and fist bumped with the Crown Prince, because now, obviously, a few months later, Saudi-backed OPEC is slashing oil production in partnership with Russia. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Menendez, just called for a freeze on cooperation with Saudi Arabia, including most arms sales. Senator Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, says the Saudis sided with Russia against the United States. Do you think it's time for the U.S. to rethink its relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Yes, and by the way, let's get straight why I went. I didn't go to one about oil. I went about making sure that we made sure that we weren't.
Okay, breaking news. Alex Jones is getting absolutely fisted by the legal system, for the record. I'm just going to briefly mention it before we get further into it, but the Sandy Hook jury verdict is in for Alex Jones' InfoWars trial in Connecticut, and it's looking enormous. One plaintiff alone is getting $120 million. $120 million. Okay, pack watch for Alex Jones. We will cover all that in a little bit, though. I just wanted to briefly step in and mention that. But let's continue with this.
We're going to walk away from the Middle East and what was going on. And by the way, today I just got off the telephone with the president I got off the phone with the Prime Minister of Israel and the president of Lebanon. They've worked out a deal. They've been at war, declared war with one another for a long time. They've worked out a boundary relationship in the Eastern Mediterranean for oil. And they're going to make an agreement that is historic. We also got overflights for Israeli planes over Saudi Arabia. We got movement in terms of how we would deal in the Middle East with aggression from Iran. But it wasn't, there were eight other parties there. It wasn't about oil.
Okay, but
But we should, and I am in the process when this House and Senate gets back. There's going to be some consequences for what they've done with Russia.
What kind of consequences? Menendez says suspend all arms sales. Is that something you'd consider?
I'm not going to get into what I'd consider and what I have in mind, but there will be consequences.